Welcome to Minnebar15 hype train. I've got my Minibar 12 shirt on, which is one of my, I think it actually is my favorite Minibar shirt that I have, to get fully into the Minibar spirit. I'm gonna get started here in just a minute. And today we're talking about static code checks. Cool. I'm just gonna wait till my stream here catches up on the side to confirm everything looks right. The other thing is I do have the Crowdcast chat open. So if anyone has questions throughout the talk, go ahead and post them in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that as we get started. All right, well, everything looks to be in working order, so I'm gonna go ahead and get rolling. To those of you who are out there, I'm not sure who is out there, but to those of you who are listening, thank you for showing up and making Minibar happen despite the COVID. Thank you, the presenter, or sorry, the Mini-Star organization for making this a pretty slick process for me. I'd never done a broadcast situation, so this is all new and it's working pretty well. So thank you to all those people that are making that happen. And thank you to the listeners that are here today. We are excited to talk about static code checks for Android. This is a talk I was hoping to give last May. And really all I'm gonna do is go through what static checks we use on our Android projects at Livefront. Speaking of Livefront, quick plug. Livefront is, if you haven't heard of us, we're a team of engineers and designers that build digital products. So if you are an Android engineer listening to this talk and you are looking to join a really cool team, talk to me after the talk. I've got my email on the last slide, and we'd love to talk to you about potentially joining. We're always looking for eager engineers that treat software as a craft. So if that's you, if that sounds like you, hit me up after the talk, and I'd love to talk to you more, basically. Okay, so before I go into what checks we actually use for our Android builds, I just want to quickly rehash why we'd want to do this in the first place. I don't think anything in these next slides is particularly controversial or novel. I think it's pretty agreed upon that we want to automate away things that we don't want to be thinking about every single day. But I think it's good to just state it anyways. And the way I kind of frame it is that an engineer's time is limited, and so there's sort of this whole category of things that really don't use up our brain cycles to their full capacity, and we want to minimize how much time we spend working on these things. Just things like worrying about formatting code. Ideally, the editor just does that for us. Syntax gotchas, like little syntactical things that could have been written a different way. It would be nice if we could just standardize those and fix those. Double checking test coverage. There's no reason that should be part of a PR process. Remembering to document things, organizing imports. These are all big red X, bad things, things we don't want to be spending too much time on. Not to say they're not important. I think all of those things are definitely important, but the goal is to not be talking about these things every single day, and not to spend time in a PR when you're reviewing someone's code, commenting on these things. When reviewing code, we want to be focusing on the more important things, such as architecture design, deciding how data is going to flow throughout an app and a code base, API design, writing classes that have a very callable interface and are easy for other developers to call and clear what they're returning. Fighting the Android framework. This is partially a joke, but honestly not really, because a lot of as an Android expert, a lot of the value we provide is being good at taking on that fight with the Android framework. So I put that in there as a joke, but like also it's for real that is actually something that we should be spending more time on. And really all these things kind of roll up into this last bullet, which is crafting testable, maintainable, beautiful code. We want to be spending our hours of the day tackling those really challenging problems that make coding super, super difficult, and also the fun side of coding, I would argue, as opposed to arguing about where brackets should go, what line they should go on. And if all that happens, this will be us. Happy computer kid. Okay, so basically I've got four kind of tools that I want to walk you through how we use them at Livefront. They are Detekt with KT Lint rolled into it, Android Lint, Danger Shroud, which is a open source Danger plugin that I actually wrote, and then Prepush hooks, which is just a little technique we use to get all these checks running before an engineer pushes their code up to CI. So starting with Detekt, it's a static analysis tool for Kotlin. I'm gonna grab a sip of water here. Oh, excuse me. Detekt is a static analysis tool for Kotlin. So it looks at your Kotlin files and actually has access to Kotlin syntax tree, which allows it to make it allows it to make checks that have to do with the logic of what's actually going on, as opposed to just the formatting of the code. And Detekt is highly configurable. I'll show a little bit of a Detekt configuration file in a minute, but there's like 500 lines in the generated file, and there's all kinds of knobs you can pull and twist to get exactly how you want it to be. And it integrates with KT Lint. For those of you who aren't familiar with KT Lint, it's a static tool that just checks for formatting errors in Kotlin. So it takes the Kotlin style guide and checks to make sure that all of your code is formatted properly. And Detekt has a plugin that allows you to integrate with KT Lint, so you can do it all in just one check, which is super nice. So here's what the config looks like. I just put a brief snippet of it because, like I said, again, it's 500 lines long. You can define your maximum issues you're allowed to have in a build, and then you can toggle on and off a bunch of different rules and formats for various checks. Super nice. Some useful rules that we've found in our builds is to require comments on classes interface public functions. Basically, if you write a new class, but you don't put a comment on the top of the file, or you write a new public function, you don't write a comment for it, the build will fail. And that includes punctuation, actually, which is like a small thing, but it's nice. And that's true of all these things. No one of these rules is like, oh my gosh, that is so crazy useful to not have to think about that. But when you add them all up, you're really removing a lot of things that you might think about or might make a comment on in a PR. Like I haven't made a comment in a year on a PR saying, hey, could you document this public function? Because the build wouldn't have passed without that documentation. Now, I sometimes still make a comment saying, hey, I'd appreciate a little more inline documentation here. But it limits all of those really obvious times where documentation should be there. You can enforce function length and complexity as far as how many branches are in a function and how long they are. This is another one where, like, I'm not in the camp who says like, oh, every function should be under 40 lines long, or you have to split it up. I'm more in the camp of, hey, when your function gets to a certain length, you should at least be forced to think about splitting it up. So sometimes we suppress these warnings, and we don't split up a function if it's too long or too complex, because it's just a long, complex function. But I think having that reminder there constantly to tell you, hey, this function is getting pretty long. Do you want to split it up? Is there a convenient way to split it up? Is a nice way to just have that reminder. You can prevent empty blocks of code. Again, this is not a big one, but it's just nice. Prevent catching generic exceptions. You've got a try catch block, and your catch is just exception E. That typically suggests you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. You should be catching a more specific exception. You can enforce naming conventions on class, member variables, all that kind of thing, which is pretty nice. Guard against potential bugs. There's just like sometimes Detekt will call out when you've made some error in Boolean logic or potential error in Boolean logic. So this one doesn't come up too often, but it is nice. And there's a bunch more. So these are just kind of some ones that I wanted to call out that are useful, but there's a bunch of them, and some of them are more tiny than this. Most of them are more tiny than this, that just add up to give you a much smoother experience or you can spend less time thinking about these things, which is great. If you're wondering about how to set up Detekt, you can go check out an article I wrote detailing how to set it up. So if you go look for this article on Medium, you'll find detailed instructions about how to set this up in your code base. And I plan to expand this article series into the other tools I'm talking about today. But you can at least start here if you're looking to set this up on your project. Yeah. So that's Detekt, which I've found super useful, and I've really enjoyed it in the last year, having it on my projects. And we've got it on all of our, almost all of our production projects, or all of them at Livefront, we think. Yeah, we've got on at least 90% of our production projects at Livefront, and I've been enjoying it. The next one to take a look at is Android Lint. Most of you probably already know this one because it comes running out of the box in Android Studio. Just when you make a new project, you've already got Android Lint going. There are two little tips I wanted to call out, though, that make it much more powerful. The first one is to treat warnings as errors. This is not actually the default configuration, and I don't even think abort on error is the default configuration. I think the default is to just warn you this stuff in console when you're making a build. And what we really want is to upgrade warnings to errors and then fail when there's an error. This allows us to keep the code base as squeaky clean as possible, and really just every single lint warning should either be suppressed or addressed. And again, I'm not opposed to suppressing. I think that can be useful at times. The other tip I want to call out is that you can add a baseline file. So this is for anyone who's listening right now, who's thinking to themselves, man, these tools seem really, really nice. I want to reduce the number of lint warnings I'm adding to my project, but I've already got a project that's been in production for 2 years, and there's a lot of messy, old, crusty files in it. And if I run Lint, I've got 350 warnings coming up. Lint allows you to specify a baseline file so that you can record all those warnings, and then only new warnings will fail builds from there on out. So there's never a worse time to add this to your project than right now, because they'll just make all of your new code that much cleaner. And I wanted to mention too here that Detekt also has a baseline file option. So if you were thinking that same thing about Detekt, oh man, this would be nice to have, but I feel like I would have a lot of build failures in my 2-year-old project. I'd still would encourage you to add Detekt to your project and set it up with a baseline file. That way, you're at least guarding against all new errors, and you can trim down that baseline file over time and work towards zero. But yeah, don't be intimidated if your project is existing and already has a ton of errors. The baseline files get around that, and I've not regretted doing this on any of my projects. It's made them all just cleaner and nicer, and spend more time solving the harder coding problems. So that's Android Lint. The next one is a Danger plugin that I actually wrote, so I'm pretty excited to share it with you. It's called Shroud. And the idea behind Shroud is that it's going to enforce unit test coverage on your PRs. So I was actually inspired by an iOS Danger plugin I saw called Slather. What Slather does, same thing as Shroud, it runs the tests in your iOS project and then lets you know what the coverage of your classes are in your PR. The only thing that Shroud requires that you're using Danger, which is super easy to set up, and Danger allows you to do a bunch of checks within a PR and post comments to a PR in an automated way. And then it also requires that you have a Jacoco coverage report. So there's a few ways you can generate that. There's Gradle plugins for generating that. You can do it by sort of handwriting your own Gradle task for doing this, but Shroud does require that you have that coverage report, and then what Shroud does is parses it and displays it in a nice way in GitHub. So this is how you set it up. This would just go in your Danger file, which if anyone is using Danger, you'll be familiar with this file. It's just a Ruby file in the project root. And all you have to do is call shroud.report with the path to your Jacoco XML report, and then a couple of values for when you want to fail based on coverage thresholds. And then here's what you get on your PR. So this is an example of Shroud making a comment on a PR. You can see it lists the total project code coverage. It lists the coverage of all the files that were modified in that PR. So This PR only has 2 modified files, very testable file and not testable file. And as you can see, if there's a file that was modified but was not found in the coverage report, like an asset file, or maybe you have some exclusions for classes that you don't test, Shroud will list those as well and only care about the ones that should be tested. And then in addition, if these are under certain thresholds, Shroud will fail your build so that you can say, hey, you can't merge this until you write some tests for this file you modified because it's under 80% coverage or something like that. So yeah, I should note at this point, if there's any engineers listening that are like anti-code coverage counting and make very salient points about how code coverage doesn't mean that a code base is well tested, I totally agree with you on that. I'm not arguing that code coverage is the end all be all for how healthy a code base is. But I would argue that keeping code coverage front of mind and keeping testing front of mind absolutely has cleaned up code bases that I've worked on and helps keep the code you're writing. When you write code with having to write tests in mind, the code you write just ends up much more modular and much cleaner than when you just write it to get it to work. So I'm not a code coverage evangelist by any means, but this has been helpful just to bring it to our front of mind as we go through development. The final little trick I'm going to show is pre-push hooks, which is actually a feature of Git. It's really cool. You can basically what pre-push hooks do, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is it allows you to put some code in a local directory that's going to run every single time you call git push. What the advantage of this is, we can run all of our checks that CI is going to run. We can run them locally before the developer even pushes up to GitHub. So it saves us that feedback loop of, oh, I pushed up a new branch to GitHub, and then Travis CI took a look at it, and 10 minutes later, oh, it looks like I've got a formatting error in my PR. That no longer happens because we have these pre-push hooks that make sure all the formatting is correct before we actually push it up to CI. Just at the end of the day, I am against a comment on a PR. We want to minimize as much as possible comments on PRs that are about formatting and other things that can be checked quickly, or a failing test, for example. So I remember before I had this, there'd be lots of times where I would push up a branch ready to be reviewed, and then, oh crap, there's a test failing because I changed something and forgot that I had to update a test. And then the only way that I know that is because CI told me. So now we've wasted 10 minutes on CI. I'm probably working on something else at this point. So I just pushed and kind of let CI go for it. And now I have to go back and fix the test and add more commits to this branch. Whereas if we run these checks, one of which is running the tests before pushing, we can guarantee that at least all the tests pass when we push, and at least our static checks pass before we push. So it's been really nice just for saving time on CI. It's not too inconvenient. The tests usually take 2 to 3 minutes to run. I'm sure people out there might have bigger projects where it might be a bigger deal. But it's the kind of thing that's like, it was annoying for about a day, and then it wasn't annoying. And furthermore, you can skip it whenever you want to. So there's 2 kind of parts to this. One, which I'll show here, is a Gradle task that moves the code we want to run into the proper local directory. The issue is that where the Git hooks live is within the Git directory, which is typically Git ignored. So the code you want to run pre-push can't be kept where it needs to be kept locally. So we have a Gradle task that just copies that bit of code into the proper local directory, and then that hook runs every time we call a git push. And I'll show those right here. So here's the Gradle task I was talking about that copies Git hooks from a different directory in the project into the correct Git folder. And again, that's .git/hooks. So that folder is not in source control, which is why we need this extra step. And then at the very bottom, you can see we run this task, install Git hooks, every time we do clean and assemble. So just basically, as soon as a new developer were to pull down the project and then assemble that project, this task would run, copying the Git hooks into the correct place on their machine. And then the hook is just super simple. It's just a little bash script that first checks to see if there's any uncommitted changes. and then quickly runs this Gradle task called checks and tests, which is, again, all the static checks I listed, plus our unit tests, and then prints out a status. So it's a pretty simple, like 2 or 3 minute check that happens every time I run git push. And I can, if I want to, if I know what I'm doing, I can skip this and just push up regularly, but I rarely do because it's typically a nice time to like take a quick breather and maybe start writing a description for your PR or double check the ticket you're working on or something like that. So I never really find this too inconvenient. And so far, with new engineers that I've added to different projects, they haven't found this too intrusive either. I know it's kind of like you're kind of like stealing their machine to run CI checks before CI runs them, but it's not a process that anyone has found to be too time consuming, and frankly it saves more time than it takes, because if you have once a week a time where you forget to run the test before you push up, or there's a broken test or a formatting error or something like that, and you have to go back and recommit and rehave CI, go through all those checks again. It's just that alone is such a brutal feedback loop and such a waste of time, that we found this to be really helpful. That's all I've got today. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and drop them in chat. I'll be monitoring that. And if you want to chat about joining our team or working with us, or really anything, shoot me an email, andrew@livefront.com. I know it's a tough one to remember, but I've got it up on screen just so you don't forget. Thank you, everybody. I will be monitoring chat for questions. Oh, sweet. Got my name up, my face up. And yeah, if anyone's interested in the slides, I'll post my email in chat right now. And you can hit me up on email, and I'll happily send my slides over. And I can send more source code as well. It wasn't super heavy on source code in the talk. If you're looking for more specifics, drop me a line. Hey, no problem, Nick. All right, y'all, I'm gonna hop off here in just a minute. If you got any more questions, now is kind of your last call, and we shall relinquish the broadcast to the next presenter. Paul says, cool tie-dye. Thank you, Paul. I got tie-dye pillowcases. I made them myself. All right, y'all. I think I'm going to call it. Thank you very much.